evening, YouTube. It's me, Tiffany, again. I finally had the opportunity to take a minute, spend some downtime, and make my first real review. I've been really busy, so I didn't actually get an opportunity to get to this till right now, but I'm actually pretty glad because it actually gave me the opportunity to figure out what my first book was going to be. And I couldn't let it be anything, so I dug deep in my archives. I actually had to order it on Amazon. So I'll give you a little bit of backstory. As I said in my first video, I am an avid reader. I read everything. And everybody has their start somewhere. I was not one of those people who read from birth. Like, I wasn't a kid who was like, hey, mommy, will you read to me? That wasn't me. My adventures with books began later in life. I was about, I want to say 14. And it's actually my parents' fault because for some reason they thought this would be a punishment. And I guess to most kids it would have been a punishment, but for me, it wasn't. It was my summer transitioning into being a high schooler. So I'm maybe 14, last day of school, and I got into trouble. Suffice to say, it was trouble enough that my parents took everything out of my room. No TV, no phone, no computer, no stereo, no video games, nothing, everything. And I looked at my mother and said, well, what am I supposed to do for the entire summer? And her exact words were, read a book. Now, most people have thought, okay, so you have to go to the library and get a book. Actually, no, because we had a pretty extensive library in my house. My mother had transitioned and we had moved from New York. And we had this huge bookcase that was full of books. And I never paid it much mind. But I had no choice because I didn't want to sit in the house and watch for four walls for an entire summer. So I picked up a book. And I don't think my parents thought that punishment through properly because at 14 years old, I probably shouldn't have been reading most of those books. They were for adults of an adult nature, most of them. If they didn't contain copious amounts of sex, then it was also stuff that just weren't good, good reading material for younger kids. Death, drugs, drinking, alcohol, rape. A lot of stuff. I didn't know this at the time because I knew nothing about reading book jackets. I knew nothing about reading the inside cover. I just picked a book based on the cover and what I thought was attractive. So, first book that I ever picked up from that bookcase is the book that I'll be reviewing today. And here it is. I'm not sure if this is going to show up properly, but I hope so. And the name of the book is called Juffie Kane. It's by Beverly Martin, and it was written so long ago. The copyright on this copy that I actually have is from 1989, but this is a reprint, so who knows. Anyhow, Miss Martin probably has a very extensive library. I will be honest, this is the only book I've ever read by her. But it left an impression on me, and it gave me an opportunity to explore something I never would have, and I thank my parents for that punishment every day. So let's get into the actual book itself. As I said, I didn't pick the book for anything except for the cover. I saw a pretty lady who looked very mysterious, and I wondered, what's that about? So I pick it up. And the book is about Juffie Kane. She is a lovely girl. Her real name is Jennifer. But as most children, they don't necessarily or are not capable of pronouncing their actual names. So she started calling herself Juffie because she didn't know how to pronounce Jennifer. She's born, I want to say right around the Depression era. 1920s, 1930s. So it's not a modern book at all. It's actually, it's not up to date. But Juffie has a very interesting story to tell. Her grandfathers are gangsters, opposing gangsters at that. So her parents are kind of like Romeo and Juliet to an extent. Her mother is Italian and her father is Jewish. And they live in New York. And she is raised in a very loving household for the most part. Somewhere along the line, her parents and grandparents learned to put all the bullshit aside because they have this beautiful child who, the one distinctive physical feature that I will always remember, she had violet eyes. That's not something you generally see or hear about in writing, so that stood out for me as a kid, and even to this day. I had to, of course, reread and review. It still stands out. Juffie grows up in a pretty average household for the most part until she's about 6. And then both of her grandfathers are arrested and sent to prison. And her mother and father try to keep the family businesses up and going. Doesn't work that well for them, but it's okay. In the meantime, you have this lovely little girl who blossoms into a beautiful teenager. And this is where her story sort of starts. She's gorgeous. Dark hair, pale skin, violet eyes, and a beauty. Along the way, she doesn't understand that her grandfathers were criminals until something tragic happens. One of his enemies comes along and he wines Juffie and he dines her and he tells her, oh, I was a friend of your grandfather's and and all the bullshit that comes along with that. And at the end of the story, he rapes her and she is 16 maybe, and she's scared and she's alone, and so she goes to a back alley abortionist. And that is the first portion of her story. In that place, she meets her lifelong best friend, Karen. And Karen and Juffie go to college together. They have fun together. They are the best of friends. And this is where Juffie decides that she's going to put all of her drama and her past behind her, and she's going to be an actress. And she wants it badly. So she auditions and she gets a manager, but there's not really a lot of opportunity until she meets this Frenchman named Paul. And Paul is a bastard. I'm being honest. He meets her. She's beautiful. She's young. She's nubile. She's talented. And he takes advantage of that by, for lack of a better word, screwing her brains out. She's young. She's never really experienced life. And here comes this Frenchman who knows way too much about the art of seduction. And he seduces her. And in some ways, he's good for her. But in most of the ways, he's terrible for her. This isn't going to be the love of her life. He's a burden that she will carry. But in her carrying this burden, he helps her hone her acting skills. He drinks too much. He parties too much. He's got an alcohol problem. But he helps her. And she somehow transitions through this relationship into pretty damn good actress. And she starts getting wonderful parts in Broadway. And then once Broadway takes notice, Hollywood comes knocking on her door. And before you know it, Juffie Kane is a household name. Everyone knows her. She's beautiful. And everyone wants to be her. She hangs with the likes of Marilyn Monroe and Frank Sinatra. And her life is pretty great. Except her past, she can't continue to escape. Her grandfathers, they still have enemies out there. And they still have people that they owe favors to. And so these people continuously pop up in her life. And in the beginning, when they begin to pop up in her life as she becomes more and more famous, it's horrible. I was reading it or rereading it, and I don't think I understood the nuances at 14 of exactly what was happening to her. But they were basically whoring her out. Your family owes us money, and you're famous, so we're going to make you basically more or less go on these horrible dates with these greasy, horrible people who touch her and do things to her that she doesn't really want them to do. But in order to keep the peace and the safe face for herself and her family, she does them. And then one day enters this gentleman. His name is Victor. And Victor is elderly, and he's an elder statesman. And when they first described him, I pictured Colonel Sanders because they said white hair, white suit. But no, now that I'm older and I'm rereading and I reread the book, I just picture someone very dapper. And he comes along and he says, "My name is Victor, and I've bought the debts that your grandfathers had incurred. And you don't have to worry about, some greasy man coming along and sticking his hand up your skirt anymore. You're safe. You can go about your life, and you don't have to worry about anything. One day I will, as in most books of this nature and most movies, I will call upon you for a favor, and you'll come and do it." And so she lives her life, and she has a baby, and tragedy hits, and her baby actually passes away. And it's terrible, and she feels low, but she's able to transition that pain into another great performance. So she's just receiving these accolades, and her life is pretty much on point for what she thinks. And years pass, and then Victor comes back. And Victor says, "I need that favor. I want you to come and do a residency," I guess would be the word that we use now. But basically it was, he wanted her to come and perform at his casino. And she initially says no. But of course, Victor, although he's an elder statesman and he seems very genuine and very gentlemanly, he's still a gangster. And so there are threats made, and her life is put on the line, and she has to go. And her manager doesn't quite understand what the hell is happening. Why would you agree to do this? He doesn't get the whole story. And people are saying you're going to throw your career away. And she can't quite bring herself to tell them the full truth, because the shame of her background still is a stigma to her at this point. So she goes. She does a performance, and people are right. It does do some damage to her career, but she's able to bounce back enough. At this point in the book, she's bounced back enough. She's got a steady gig on Broadway, but her husband, he's horrible. She's still married to Paul. Paul is the antithesis of anything that she even wants. She doesn't want to be near him. They have had a child and lost a child, and she just has she doesn't care anymore. She doesn't want to be around him anymore. So she tells him that she wants a divorce. And this is when Paul gets ugly, and he starts threatening her with everything. "I will expose you, and I will expose your teenage pregnancy, and I will expose your parents and your grandparents, and your life will be miserable, and you'll be a pariah, and you'll never get work again." And she can't seem to get away. And in the process of all of this, she meets a man named Michael, and she falls in love, genuinely. But her and Michael can't be together, and Paul is still hanging around, holding it against her. So what does she do? She comes up with a plan. She wants to get away from her life. She's so sick of everything. She doesn't want to be a star anymore. She doesn't want to deal with gangsters anymore, because although Victor said, "We are not going to ask anything else of you," of course he lied. He asked a million things of her. She performed at the casino. Now it's come and do this and come and do that. And she's just stuck. And not only is she stuck with Victor, she's stuck with Paul. And it's just getting more and more ridiculous. And then she finds out that her best friend, throughout all of this, who has stood by her and she's trusted, her best friend slept with her husband. And that was the last straw. And in the book, you're like, oh my God, how is she handling all of this? And it's getting darker and darker, and she gets to a point where she starts saying goodbye to people. And I'm like, it can't possibly be ending where I think it's ending. But it does. Juffie Kane dies. She dies in an odd avalanche in the Swiss Alps. And her body is quickly taken and cremated and buried, and nobody gets to say anything, but there's this huge spectacle of a funeral where everyone who is anyone shows up, and they cry and they say amazing things about her, but at the end of the day, she's gone. And people mourn her and they're sad until one day her best friend, Karen, she gets a letter. And it's an odd letter, but it's asking her to come to Switzerland. And so she takes her up on this letter and she says, what is this about? And she goes through the most obscure sort of traveling and ends up at this Swiss chalet. And in the Swiss chalet, who's there but her friend, Juffie? And I was ecstatic when I read that. I was through the roof. She's not dead. Hallelujah. She faked her death. And for those of you who may go out and read the book and decide that I may have ruined the plot for you, I'm sorry. Not. I told you I'd review the book and I'd be thorough. But it's a great book. And I've left out plenty for you guys to want to take it in. But there's enough there. I will always love this book. It was the first book that I ever really read and felt like, wow, I liked and enjoyed that. I thank my parents for that punishment. It really wasn't. And it opened up a door for me that I have not been able to really put down. Ever since then, I've read almost constantly. There have been bits and pieces where I didn't read as much as I wanted to, or I didn't have the opportunity to. But I've always been a reader. And so I will always be a reader. And I love this book. And I love the characters and the story that it told. And I've given you guys a brief review of it, but I wanted to at least touch base on this book before I get into all of the more recent things that I've been reading. And God, there's so much. But I wanted to at least touch base with this book because this is the book that started it all for me. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed this review. I have enjoyed doing it. And I will be speaking with you guys very, very soon. I promise, much sooner than this initial review. It will not take weeks to get this done again. But yes, I wanted to pay homage to the first book that I ever really loved. So on that note, I'm going to say good night. Hopefully you guys will enjoy this. I understand it's a very long review, but I felt I needed to do it a little bit of justice. So we're going to say bye, and hopefully you guys will be curious enough about the book to at least give it a cursory glance, if not a full thorough read.